fantastic. All right, and it says got it. Okay, fantastic. Okay, so I will start, and if people join in, that's completely fine. You know, it's not that big of a deal. So we can, and again, you're recording, and we will I will share stuff with you at the end. So thank you for coming, and thank you, Laura, for inviting me. I was really excited to have this invitation to come and speak with everyone during education and International Education Week. And the topic is really something that I have been dedicating a lot of my career to, you know, looking at access and inclusion. And let me go to the first slide here. Actually, sorry, I did not share my, did I share? I have to share my screen. Sorry about that. Okay. Okay, here we go. All right, does everyone see the picture? Yeah, okay. All right, fantastic. Yeah, so the topic today, infusing access and inclusion into study abroad. And it is something that I have been spending, you know, I think ever since grad school, thinking about these issues and thinking about making study abroad accessible. So again, to reintroduce myself, my name is Katie DeGuzman. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am the Dean and Director of Education Abroad at Dickinson College, which is located in central Pennsylvania. I have been in the field of international education for over 15 years. What might be of interest to you all is that my first job after I finished grad school in Florida was with a community college, Santa Fe. It's now called Santa Fe College, but it was Santa Fe Community College at the time, in Gainesville, Florida, which is next to the University of Florida. And so I was a one-person international education coordinator in Gainesville. And you know, since then I worked a lot primarily in Florida until I moved over to Dickinson. But I have been, for Diversity Abroad, I've been the chair of their task force on first generation and high financial needs students. And I have been presenting and working a lot within kind of this global DEI intercultural space, you know, for many years. And as I said, even back into graduate school. So for today, I kind of structured my presentation a little bit. I wanted to start with the why, and then we will get into accessibility and inclusive programming. And the why, I think everyone here is probably a dedicated person who knows the why. But I think it's also helpful because sometimes this work can be challenging, and it is a lot of work. And I think reminding ourselves, like, you know, why are we doing this is really important. So this is the part of where I want everyone to participate. I am going to stop my share, and I'm going to go to my Mentimeter, and I will be sharing the Mentimeter here. And the website will be on the Mentimeter along with the code. And I will also send into, okay, can everyone see that? And then also, I could put a link in the chat, so hold on there. You could also go right to the chat. And so if everyone would just kind of put in, again, I know this can be basic, but what are the benefits of study abroad for students? You know, why do we care? What do they get out of having international education as part of their education? And you can actually put in as many words as you want to. Okay, cultural competency, absolutely. Cultural enrichment, cultural awareness. So yes, I'm seeing a lot of cultural. Oh, I love, okay, flexibility and adaptability. I love those. Okay, oh, April put in the chat, you get a personal understanding of the people and their culture, develop fluency in the target language. Okay. Transformative. And I think really important, there's a lot that is involved in skill building, I think is what a lot of people are also indicating. Yeah, learning a different language, learning a different culture, confidence to go anywhere in the world and land on your feet. I love that. I love that. The confidence, the independence, doing things that you didn't think you could do before. And, you know, those kind of permeate throughout. Learning to rely on yourself. These are all wonderful. So thank you very much. So I'm going to stop sharing this and I will go back to our presentation. Okay. Okay, are we all back to the presentation? Okay, fantastic. Okay, and then, oh, I saw some other stuff, see sites and experience what you were learning while in your college. Oh, yes, that's another obviously really great point. It's also connected to your academics, right? So I will share some of what I had come up with, which is all going to be very familiar to you, I'm sure. So the why. And I have just a little, sentence here about, expanding these opportunities is essential to providing, equitable institutional experience for marginalized student populations. It ensures that all students are able to experience the benefits of study abroad. And we know that student participation in international education programs, it is, increased self-confidence and maturity. That is something that one person already kind of touched upon. Greater intercultural learning and development. We had a lot of that about cultural competence and that skill building. Higher academic achievement, improved student retention rates. Okay, so I think in general, students who participate in any type of activities, we know that there's increased retention rates, but particularly something high impact like a study abroad experience, and career benefits such as greater employment prospects. And I know that often that it is a consideration. When you're at a school that is building technical skills that might have many 2-year programs, is what are those immediate benefits for your career? And I think now more than ever, that skill building, learning how to adapt, learning how to be flexible, learning how to tolerate ambiguity in a very changing workforce where you have to know how to be able to adapt. And I'm sure you do have many people who are coming back to change careers or try new things, right? And so that ability to adapt and take those skills and the ability to shift and navigate through uncertain circumstances, all which comes through study abroad, is something that's going to pay dividends lifelong for many of your students. And though I do like to say to some of our students now that living through a pandemic has also taught you how to tolerate ambiguity, be flexible, and be okay with kind of some of those, getting you started on some of those skills, of course, which normally you wouldn't have to. So I just wanted to really start with that because it is, it can be a significant amount of work that gets added to your plate to make these things a possibility. And so, but the outcomes are so broad and so beneficial. Okay, so now we're going to move to another participatory section, is making study abroad accessible. What are the barriers to entry? So feel free to either unmute yourself or put this in the chat, but what are barriers that you have witnessed or that you feel that students perceive are barriers to be able to go on a study abroad program? So again, feel free to just unmute yourself and talk. I can't see everybody because I'm sharing my screen, but please, you can just kind of call it out or you can put it in the chat. So I already see finances.
I was about to say the cost.
The cost, absolutely.
I'll add students not believing that study abroad is for them, right? Just not even really connecting to it as something that they might be able to do.
Thank you.
Just don't want to put my hair.
I'm sorry.
Obligations.
Familial obligations, you said?
Yes, familial obligations.
Okay. And you're going to see my list. So we're going to see how many. We're going to see how many you get, and you're doing really good. If this was like Family Feud or whatever, you're doing really well. April, you had one.
Sometimes it's a perceived lack of self-confidence on the part of the student, and sometimes that lack of self-confidence comes from the home situation. I've known students who tell me they want to do it, but their parents have said, no, you're not mature enough to do it. And I know the student well enough to know that, yes, you could do it. So sometimes the family does not encourage the student to do it.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And
Yeah.
also uncertainty of where to travel to, like which program to choose. You know, what
Sometimes
is,
there's that fear of being away, the students themselves and or their parents being afraid of them going away sometimes for the first time, especially if it's a far location.
yes, yes, absolutely. I will quickly say, I remember, I think it was during the tsunami in Japan, and the community college I had worked at had a hard time not having students leave, pull out of the program, a program that was supposed to go to China, because there was when there was the tsunami in Japan, right? So that's another piece of like that perceived, like, oh, it seems like it's over there, and they all kind of, you know, meshed together for it was family members that, you know, were pushing them against that. Any other ones? You're hitting most of them that I have previously listed. Okay.
I said,
Nervous?
oh.
Oh no, please go.
I said that some of the issues is also uncertainty of place to travel to, or uncertain of the discipline that they're going to go into and how they're going to intertwine. So that becomes the hard pitch, right? To convince, hey, this is something interesting in this place. And sometimes students may not want to go to that place or may not be into the discipline of study. You know, that's another one.
Right. So so program fit, meeting their educational goals. I saw Laura just shared, you know, yes, so that at some places that they may not feel welcome based on their identity, and that could be either, you know, perceived, or it could be very well it's unsafe, you know, in some locations. Absolutely, you know, especially with some of our LGBTQ students, you know, and so being aware, being realistic, but also, yeah, kind of knowing what the scope is. So I'm going to reveal what I had here. Okay, so what I did have here was, and Laura, if I miss anything in the chat, if you could just also help me, because I have like 3 screens here. I'm thinking, I just don't want to miss anybody. Sometimes, what is study abroad? I've worked at enough like large regional institutions plus community college that really do, I have met students that really did not know exactly what study abroad was, that didn't know that was a thing, or didn't know that was something that they could do at their institution. So I think that's really, really important. And knowing your programs exist. You know, how do they know what is offered? And I'm going to go into, the next slide is going to go into talking about each barrier one by one. The finances, which you already talked about. Will this work with my educational goals? Familial and work obligations. Family, no one has ever done this in my family before. I don't see myself as someone who can do this. And basically some of it is like, I just don't even have a passport, and how do I even do that? Like, that seems overwhelming, right? So, and then the other ones that you shared. So I think we've come up with a really, really, really great list. And so now I'm going to, let's address some of these. And feel free really to either put in the chat or unmute yourself and kind of either ask questions or add to what, because I do think that you're going to be, you know, you are familiar with these barriers, you know, because you work with students all the time and you hear this. So the first one we said that I talked about was really, what is study abroad? And I think this is, you know, kind of looking at your own college, to think about like, who is responsible for advising students? Is there a one-stop shop or a dedicated person that they can go to get that information? Is there also a dedicated site, how do they receive information? So do they receive information online? Do they utilize the website? You know, is information, you know, in orientation, do they know who kind of their person is? And I know this can be really complicated when budgets are tight to dedicate, you know, a whole person. As I said, at the institution I was at, the community college I was I was a one person office, and even that seems sometimes like a luxury within that space. So one thing that is also that I found helpful when I was working at Santa Fe College was that I utilized graduate students at the local university, which was the University of Florida, for when I was stretched too thin. And so this was something very helpful to me, that it was students who were maybe in a master's program around higher education, who have to do practicums and different types of internships and things like that. So that was just one type of thing, but it also is advocating, you know, at your institution that there is some space and time for someone to have that role, and getting that word out there. So that kind of goes into number 2, is knowing that your programs exist. Know, where are students finding information? How do students find out about study abroad? Is there, you know, what is your social media presence? Are you featured at orientation? Are there places that students get some general information when they come to the college? How prominently are you featured on the college's website? And, you know, kind of where can you be in that priority kind of places? Is it partnering with your student life team and so on and so forth, to know that these things are there? And that's going to kind of lead into some of my later addressing barriers as well, in terms of getting that word out. Finances. So really, once students know that it exists and knows what programs are offered and know what study abroad is, I think this finances is probably the number 1 barrier at every college, you know, across the United States. I think this is the number 1 thing that students say is keeping them from being able to study abroad. So there's really 2 things to look at as finances. There are, how is the program designed and priced? And how is it, you know, packaged together? And then there is the other piece of like, so there's the cost and how is that priced out? And then there is what kind of assistance is available for students to help them, because there is actually always going to be a cost. And so even if you get that cost down very low, what is available, what kind of assistance? So what I mean by how our program's designed and priced is that there are ways that you can design a program so you can make choices, you know, depending on, you know, where you go. You know, are you going to go to a location that the flight costs $1,200, $1,500, or can you go to another location where the flights are going to be $400 or $500? Do you stay designing a program where you stay in one location and you do day trips is often much more economical than, you know, doing like kind of a grand tour. Are you including food in, you know, already kind of included, you know, making sure a lot of those out of the pocket costs are included into your program, and thinking about, can you take advantage of things that don't have a lot of entry fees? And so there is quite a lot that I could go on and on about that, but really looking at, you know, making those choices to keep that cost down, where, you know, a $4,000 program could be brought down to, like, you know, $2,500 or $1,500. A big piece of this, and I bring this one up because in talking with Laura, I don't believe that this is yet, this is something that your college does, is that can they use their aid? So meaning, is it connected to an academic course? So in many, pretty much everywhere that I've worked before, the study abroad piece is connected to credit and connected to a course, which of course allows the students to use their federal and state aid and scholarships, as opposed to being, you know, something additional. And so I think that is a key piece of helping students being able to go, because it can then get added to their cost of attendance. So, and the other thing is looking at, of course, you know, scholarship funding. At one place I worked, you know, they were able to advocate with the board to have a study abroad fee be added in as a, like, you know, the athletic fee or the health fee or the different fees that are added on, that was borne kind of by the entire campus. and then was put into a pot for scholarship money. So that may not be politically available, or may not have that ability, but trying to be very creative of where can some scholarship money come, can things move around, because I think that is, a really important part, that students are going to need scholarship funding to go. And whether that's a particular donor, or, working with your donor, kind of, if you have like a donor relations, or is there someone who really cares really deeply about this, or, and finally, also, are you utilizing outside funding like Gilman, like the Fund for Education Abroad? So how many of you, I guess you can just kind of put a hand up or a nod, are familiar with the Gilman Scholarship? Okay, so I want to say this has been one of my biggest tools over my entire career, and it makes big differences, is having a person who will give a few Gilman workshops. You create the workshop once. I would even send you my workshop. You create it once, you give it to students, and even just kind of agreeing to kind of read over some of their essays. But I have been a Gilman reviewer so many times, and that's also a very good experience, is to be a Gilman reviewer, so you can advise students. But this has paid such big dividends for my entire career, and community college students are such a privileged group in their kind of what do you call it, in their rubric of how students, they look at students, and they look at underrepresented students abroad, and it is really really important. And so I think looking at that kind of funding, look at the Fund for Education Abroad. And Diversity Abroad also has a lot of resources for students, and lots of scholarship resources. And so it does take some putting together on the front end for students, but also too, technically any scholarship that is for academic credit can go towards a study abroad experience. So again, this does take some coordination to do it, but I think students don't even necessarily know that it's out there, and it does have a pretty high success rate. So these are some things that I think could be very helpful. And then the one someone had mentioned this before, they're working with my educational goals. So who are these programs designed for? How are they going to quote unquote count? So imparting that value of the program to their educational goals. So is there a way to build a program around, health students who are doing, so that they can do some like observational hours, or learn about healthcare in a different country, or some type of very short, kind of civic engagement or internship piece, like a practical piece? Can that be built in there so that they see that kind of practical benefit? But also looking at attaching a study abroad program to a course that's fairly popular, that's a fairly popular core course that many students have to take, and attaching a study abroad experience to that, so that they can make it, as opposed to just being an elective that's an extra, they probably don't have time for that. So either connecting it to their career goals, or connecting it to a course that is like a gateway course, or a core course that everybody has to take, I think is really important. So it's already kind of like a seamless type of thing. Any questions or thoughts on these before I get to the next four?
Just real quickly, in terms of what you were saying, and connecting it to perhaps their field of study. So service learning, something that Laura has also worked on, a service learning course is being considered for study abroad. So next summer, it's going to hopefully be a sustainability with service learning, but there could be other opportunities for other faculty to do something that is service learning related to their area, and students can get credit for.
Right. And that, I think, if you have many students who are into your programs that are focused on workforce and what else do they need, and they can enhance, their perhaps their applications for the next cycle. I mean, I used to, at one point in my career, I worked a lot with pre-health students, and they sometimes would not be able to dedicate, let's say, like a whole semester. But if they could go on a program that also had them do some observation hours or some research or something that was related, that would go on their next application for whatever type of, you know, health school they were going to apply for. And so some of that practical piece where they could benefit. So looking into that is, I think,
Katie,
really helpful.
Can I ask a question about that? So I don't think I understand the logistics of tying it to a course. Do we mean that we teach the course in person on campus, and then at a certain point, like say if it's a short-term course, at a certain point, it's expected of the students as part of the course to do, say, like a 2-week study abroad? You know, not if it weren't, I understand the idea of like a semester length course in another country, or even a short-term course that takes care of all of the units. But let's say I'm teaching, like, say, a cultural anthropology course at Miramar, but I would like to attach a study abroad experience or an international experience. How does that work? I mean, can you mandate students, like, if you're in this class, you must go? How does that work?
So that can be up to you, right? Depending on what your kind of requirements are for, you know, teaching that course, or do you have 2 sections, or so on and so forth. But so this is how, you know, and this is not just at the community college I work with, but at other colleges. But I'll just give you the example of when I was at Santa Fe, there was a cultural anthropology course. And so very similar, you know, so it was a semester long course in person, and everyone in the course went during spring break, and we all went to Ecuador. And so that was part of the course. And so now it can be very different. Like at my own institution now, we have this as well, that we call them globally integrated, where it's a semester long course. And then the students either go, typically we either do spring break, but of course you're limited to like 10 days, of course, because, you know, the weekends on either end, or we do it like in May, right when the, you know, kind of the semesters at the end, but they get I grades until they get back from the program. And they do them both ways. Sometimes there will be a program where everyone is in the course required to travel. If you don't think that can, you know, is going to work, or you need to have a larger course, and, you know, your course usually has 30, you're not going to take 30 students, then you can do it where there's differing assignments, right? Because like the travel piece has a lot of contact hours and has, you know, things they'll be working on. And so those who don't travel may have like some other kind of project that they do while they're at home. You know, that type of thing. And so yeah, and so it's good to do, obviously. I mean, you can also do them in you know, let's say January or August, but it is really better to do in the middle, I think, or at the end, because then you have them this whole time and they're getting those like foundations like throughout. But, you know, and so now there are certainly people that do like a standalone program in the summer, but, you know, typically those are going to be a little longer, 3 or 4 weeks. And of course that raises the cost, and then they have to pay the tuition money with that. Whereas attached to a spring course, they're already paying for that. That tuition. And so you do have to get your financial aid office. You know, there is some setup and communication about adjusting their cost of attendance, but as this being a piece of the program. But it's nice to be able to do all that work ahead of time with the whole group. So, but anthropology does lend itself very nicely to it. Oh, Judy.
When I did a study abroad as a student in my graduate program, what the professor did was something similar. So we were all in the class, but in terms of finances or time constraints or whatever commitments, not everyone were able to go to the trip. But those that did go, she tied it into not having to do the final paper, which was a nice incentive. But that's how that worked for me when I was able to do a study abroad for a shorter period of time, but it was a semester long course.
Right. And I think that also makes the case for, you know, students getting, how does this tie into my educational goals? Because if you're already concentrating, let's say, on anthropology, now you get to actually have that, like, lived, kind of experience into that experiential piece of the course that you're doing. And it makes it a very nice, natural fit. So, okay, so I'm going to go to the next slide here for our 5, 6, 7, and 8 barriers. Okay, so familial and work obligations. I would say that one of those is, of course, the length of the program, and this is also where you think about where you're flying to, because where can you get much quicker than, it is going to be harder to go to Asia, let's say, and with jet lag and with the long trip and so on and so forth. Not to say not do it. I'm just saying that that's a consideration about how long can people be away. And so, sometimes a spring break might work better than, several weeks. But also this tie, I said I was going to tie this back to where are they finding information? How are they finding out about this programming? So if they can know way ahead of time, or if you have programs that are done repeatedly, so they can expect that they're going to happen. So as I shared the anthropology program in Ecuador, that one would go every single year. And so students could know, when they got there their first year, that they could go the next year. And so they had a lot of time to plan, a lot of time to also do some saving of money, or even if they just know that you have a 2-year rotation, right? So at least if it's every other year, you'd always catch, one of the groups, but that people knew these things were happening. I go travel somewhere for work, and I have 2 kids, and I am like planning months in advance of like, who's going to do pickups, who's going to do, childcare, and can a family member, help out, and blah, 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 blah. And so, and I'm used to doing this. So really thinking about, what are you offering regular? What are you putting in rotation? Where are they finding the information? How? I think that the whole ability to plan can really help with that. And also too, they might be able, if they know ahead of time, in terms of work obligations, getting that time off, but also thinking about the time that they're not working is time they're not often making money, right? So that's a real impediment. And so, but if they knew the year before, maybe they could be adding an extra shift, twice a month or something like that, to make up for that piece of when they're not working. So the next one was, someone else had said this as well, no one has ever done this in my family before. Okay. And so this is not just community college. This is for most, pretty much a lot of first gen students is, so thinking about, do you have not only communication with students, but, can you think about what kind of communication might be for family members or parents, depending if they're, younger, or just family members in general, or their strong ties to their extended family that might have a lot of sway on what they do. So you don't necessarily have to do family meetings per se, but do you have a section for family members on your website, in your communications? Are you putting these things in different languages? So what are the primary languages spoken by your students or their families? And can you have a one-sheeter that kind of explains what it is? And then finally, I would say helping the student articulate the value of this program to their family members. Because if no one's ever done it, it may seem extremely extravagant. Oh, you think you're so fancy and you're going to go off to X, and nobody in our family has ever done this before. Like really articulating, helping them articulate, what are they going to gain out of this? How is it connected to their academics and their future and their career? And helping the student have that conversation with their family. And you can even put a general family flyer out or web page out that says, these are all the things and benefits that someone may have. So thinking about that. So another one is, I don't see myself as someone who can do this. And this ties into like, no one I know has ever done this before. So some of it does, can tie back to what your marketing looks like, thinking about what are you, if you have a flyer, if you have a web page and you show people on it, are you showing a lot of different type of people, a lot of different ages, different identities, different abilities? That's, representation is really, really important. When I was creating my PowerPoint for this presentation and I went to stock photos for people traveling, it was all, young white people kind of looking out into the distance, and that does send a message if that's, so that's really important. Where are you advertising? And if you are going to be able to give presentations, where can you go to student groups that already exist, that are already there to support students around a certain identity? And can you go to that group instead of inviting students to generally come to a general session and kind of go where the students are? And then finally important is using previous students. And if you haven't done a lot of study abroad programs, you may not have easy access to previous students, a panel. But this is also where an idea of thinking about partnering with, I know you have 2 other colleges in your system that do some study abroad programs, and also some local universities. Like, can you talk to their study abroad office and be like, do you have, would you mind, do you have students who have done this and have various, identities, and they've done study abroad, because a peer-to-peer is very helpful, but seeing someone like themselves and hearing about their experience. And it also touches upon what someone else had said about feeling like, am I going to be discriminated against, or is this for me? That peer piece is very important. And if any of you don't know a lot about the study abroad field, because you're thinking like, what, we'd contact the local university and there be random study abroad office, I have felt that this has been a very sharing field. It's not a competitive, like, oh, I just did all this work, I'm not going to share any with you. It's a very much like, oh, I just created a whole guidebook and it took me 2 months to create it. Oh, would you like this guidebook? Here, take it. Like, that is the kind of field it is. And so I do, most study abroad offices, if they think they can help you, I think they would be amenable to saying, sure, contact our peer advisors. They would be happy to help. And finally, the I don't have a passport. This just seems so much kind of what I had said before about having regularity, planning far in advance, and having just guides and materials just written out, or even, how they have some of those applications from the post office, like having them in like your student center or something like that, where they can easily just get that guide, because sometimes going online and finding it and printing it can be hard. And they do, I do know that sometimes there's organizations like provider organizations that do scholarships for passports. I don't know that they've done them since the pandemic, but looking at that, and there are some even schools who have become passport facilities, and then they earn some money on that, and then they can use it towards passport scholarships. So I'm going to stop again and see if there's any questions or thoughts right there. Okay. All right. But I'm not imagining that any of this is unfamiliar to you, like thinking about all these different barriers and working with your students, because you're here and you're doing it, and these can all be challenges. Okay, so let me go to my next slide here. So the other pieces, there's access, okay? And there is getting students to the gate, as we would say, and getting them there physically. But that is not the end of the story. And so one phrase, a kind of a thought leader that I work with a lot in this global DEI space, his name is Dr. Miramar, and he kind of does a twist on access without support is not opportunity, and calls it access without support is not equity. And I think this is really important, because it's not just the way diversity and inclusion are different. It's the numbers, or it's, and belonging. It's the same thing, is that inclusion also is very different. It takes, it's a lot about the intentionality, but it's also about how are you creating the programs, how are you, creating your group and your organization to make it an inclusive program. Okay, I'll stop for a second. Dora, you had a question?
Yeah, hi. Can you repeat what you said, Katie, and the person you mentioned? You said access without support and the person again?
So this is his name is Ahmed, Amerahhed. And so he says this informally. I don't think this is like, we work together, we present together a lot. And so this is not like a published quote, but it
I
is.
understand. It's just there are certain things that I think allow other people to have a better understanding of what we're talking about when we talk
Gotcha.
about equity and diversity and opportunity means you also need to support them financially. And so whatever it is that you said, I think that might actually ring a little more clearly to some people that need to hear them.
Okay, and it is based off of an actual published, I think it's like a kind of opinion piece called, and then you could Google the piece is called Access Without Support is Not Opportunity. And it's kind of a shifting of that, but there is actually an article that's called Access Without Support is Not Opportunity. And I think Tinto is the name of the person who originally said that. But I think this is even where I face a challenge at my own institution, is that we do have very good representation of various backgrounds and identities and high financial need. But I think the support piece is always continuous. Okay, so I kind of broke it down into a few different areas that you have to think about, where your support to have inclusive programs. And one, of course, is in your pre-departure and in your preparation, and also doing it with a course really helps give you that more of that time. But it's with a lot of intentionality about intercultural competence and diversity, equity, inclusion, right? So and I don't know if this is getting to, I don't know if I want to bring this in here, but like we use this model called the intercultural praxis model by Catherine Sorrells. And what it does is it puts together the intercultural piece with the power, the privilege, the marginalization, and it helps you and includes like action and reflection and different things like that. But this is how thinking going into the pre-departure of what do the students need to know? What do they need to know about engaging across difference? What do they need to know about that different culture? And you can do some, simple things we've always, heard about was, collectivistic and individualistic and those mainstays of intercultural competence, but also looking at preparing them for what they're going to experience and see around, marginalized communities and, majority culture and that their lens of maybe US DEI lens and justice, can look very different in other countries, and there's different histories and different things are acceptable or not acceptable, and understanding, having a good understanding of, yes, I am going to a very homogenous community and I am going to just stand out. So not shy away from that, but also talk about how they're going to navigate that and what are those different histories within that country, that is going to be different than the United States. April, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I had a couple of things. One factor that needs to be explored is language, because if they're going to a country where the target language is different from their own, hopefully they have skills, and hopefully regarding access without support is not equity, that those language courses that would help prepare the student will not be canceled if they're low enrolled. That's another issue with equity in community colleges, is everything is about enrollment. And so there is a need to protect courses that can prepare students for study abroad if they're low enrolled.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely a really great point, because you want students to have, some language skills, and there's a lot of cultural skills you learn through language courses as well, nuance and such. Dora, did you have your hand up?
Oh, sorry, I was just clapping. I totally agree.
Oh, that was a clap. That was a clap.
Yes, yes. I'm a language professor too. She's
yes.
ready.
And
Need to be culturally and linguistically prepared for the place they're going to.
right. And language courses are a place where students are naturally learning intercultural skills and nuance and things around language. So that's that's really important. And it's a really good place of where you can think about talking about difference and talking about, just things like pronouns and gender and different things that don't exist in other languages in the same way, but the students might have expectations that this is, and so that's like really, is a really good place to think about in your pre-departure. I know we only have, this has been such a really, really great conversation. I'm going to speed it up a bit. Brave spaces and group expectation setting. When you're traveling with a short-term program with a group, this is huge. Of really making sure that group has, whether it's a contract together, activities that you've done, that they have each other's back, that they understand that some students in their group may be impacted more than others around their identity, and that everyone kind of has that understanding, as a group, and building those expectations. And brave spaces means like having a space where students can reflect and process throughout the process of study abroad. So whether it's there, whether there's an incident or not. And I do hate to say this, that sometimes they call it like some people call it the dirty secret of study abroad, is that sometimes students feel, and it depends what your demographic is, of course, within your group, but students feel that they are most targeted in some ways by the students within their own cohort, as opposed to on campus. I mean, not on campus, when in the country. So that's another, factor to consider. I put in there bridge building, and that really is the role of the program leader, is having, doing this bridge building of understanding that culture, having your own, done your own kind of identity work, and understanding your own, where you fit into the privilege and kind of where you fit into the space in relation to your students, understanding where your students are coming from, but also helping them understand the local culture, and specifically around, it could be very difficult to understand around things like discrimination and marginalization and those local histories, and being prepared to kind of bridge those two things and have some serious conversations of things that they're going to observe. Dora?
So thank you for bringing that up. I think that's a really interesting point. You're hitting so many very valuable points for people who are doing study abroad programs and preparing their students instead of necessarily like learning it after the fact. So what are some particular suggestions you have for that sort of in-group tension, and that tends to hit on equity issues? And in this case, the one that I had was race, and it was totally in group. It had nothing to do with the destination. It was between two students of the same race, and they had a lot of disagreements over that. So how do you, where would you build that in? And
Right.
How do you build that in? So you're going to do that at some point in your preparation, but how do you weave it in without pointing? You're being intentional in the method that you're doing it, but you have to, it's so specific, right?
I mean, you can.
Katie? It's like, how do you include everybody in that process, and at what point, and what are like some suggestions you might have for that ahead of time?
Sure. And of course, every group is going to be different, right? I mean, that sometimes you can end up with a really great leader who is very positive, and then they lead all the other students. And sometimes you can end up with the strong personality that's negative and leads everyone down that path. And that is really hard. I mean, I think the expectation setting is really important, and a group behavioral, these are the things that we're going to abide to as a group, something in a pre-departure. So one activity that I really do like to do with a group is you have a circle, and these are things we want to get out of this program, and these are the things we don't want to get out of this program. And you do it in front of the board, and everybody kind of, so starting on the same page. And so you'll constantly see things like, outside of the circle, they say, I don't want to to see clicks. I don't want to see gossip. I don't want to see, meanness, or I don't want to see, and then sometimes you'll just learn things. This has nothing exactly to do with that, but you'll learn things that, a trip to Europe, someone puts inside the circle that their whole plan is to go shopping the whole time, right? Like but you learn some things, and then creating kind of like a community contract of how are we going to interact? How are we going to treat each other? How are we going to agree as a group to process any kind of conflict that happens? And it's really important that the students are invested in creating that kind of group compact, that they feel ownership over it, as opposed to you placing this on them. And kind of, having, I don't know if you've ever been to presentations where you start out with ground rules that, we agree that we are, kind of all going to, speak respectfully. We're going to take turns. We're not going to judge people. Everyone's coming in with different experiences. And I think as the leader as well, is if you could say, like, I'm coming in with different experiences than you, and we are all learners together, so there's a lot about setting that tone and that group. Now, another thing that I think, maybe this wouldn't be where, in your instance, but, we had done what I think was a mistake, where we did identity specific workshops where we were like, oh, workshops for student of color, right? And because we wanted students to have a space. But at the same time, we were like, no. Our, for us, it was white, predominantly white institution. Like, their peers need to also know how to be allies, and their peers need to know, this is not something in learning and concepts and microaggressions and power and privilege, and these kinds of concepts should not just only be discussed with those who are minoritized. This has to be the entire group has to understand and get that and get these group dynamics and be learning together, and not separating and separating those things out, even though we do want to have our intention was to have a kind of a safe space where students could process that, but everybody needs this education. So does some of that help, Dora?
No, thank you. It does. It was, I do a lot of this like pre-work. I went to an amazing workshop and I integrate a lot about that and try to heighten their awareness that, you might feel comfortable here, you might not feel comfortable there. But it was very, very specific. It was very unexpected. It was among two of my students, and they were both Black males, but they had an issue with each other for the way each of them identified as Black males. And it created a lot of tension with the other students. And I felt very underprepared to assist them. One, you can see from my picture, I'm a white female, and it was really not my role to be mentoring them, because I know both of them very well, and they both needed a little bit of support, one of them in particular. So I just was trying to preemptively think, in the future, how would I try to smooth out some of those?
And that sounds a little bit more like group dynamics, and and you'll never get that same situation again. Like, you would never get that exact same situation again. But I would lean on you to talk to your student life folks, right? Because they're doing a lot more group student advising, and so advising them to either come in and lead a session or help you in that way. So I just want to get to the last point, and I'm going to put my email at the end, and I'm also going to send this presentation to Laura. I'm going to send her a bunch of resources, and she can send it out to everyone. But one more point is I have how to maximize working with a provider. And I know that Laura's going to give a great presentation on working with EF, but I think it's really important to know that all of the providers now that you're working with should be having, and EF does, because I went and looked, have a website dedicated to diversity, equity, inclusion. They have student guides on thinking about identity. Okay. And so leaning on them for resources, but also leaning on them to make sure that your program is inclusive as possible. And I would say, I have taken students on an EF program to Egypt before, and this was many years ago, so they could be different. But two things that I think are really important is that insisting that you're not just seeing sites that revolve around majority culture is really, really important, right? That there's contributions of all different areas within a country, and not just the majority culture is very important, that students see the variety. And the other piece is insisting that they include sessions or, things from host communities, and having voices from the host community represented, and not just seeing sites, not divorcing it from who are the people of this place, as opposed to just going and see the sites. And I think that those are two really important things that you can insist upon and use, pull the card, like, well, your website says that you're really focused on this. And so I think that's really important. But Laura's going to give, I saw that she's going to give a really great session on working with a provider in EF, so she can talk a bit more about that. But this is my email address, and I am, happy for anyone to reach out. But as I said, I will send a follow-up email to Laura with a copy of this presentation, with some, as I like to call them, goodie bag items, with some articles and different and types of things that you may be interested in. Again, I'd be happy to have anyone email me if you wanted to discuss any more. So, and I think that's my time. So thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it.
Katie,
Thank you so
thank
much
you
for
so
being
much.
here.
Yes, go ahead, Judy.
I was just going to say thank you so much for being here and giving us your expertise as a board member for Diversity Abroad, and just giving us some really good, helpful information, and for those of us that want to take students abroad, and hopefully it entice the students who are here to figure out a way to make it happen for yourselves, even if it's like a 2-week, if you have family commitments or work commitments. For me, it was transformative to be able to study abroad, and then I've been able to take students abroad from USC. That I've seen how much it made a difference. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. It's go back to the why, right? That will keep you going. So, all right. It was so nice to meet you all, and enjoy the rest of the day of your activities. So
Thank you so much, Katie. We really appreciate you sharing your expertise with us. And I can't wait for the packet of goodies.
yes, I will send them.
I'm
All right.
sure.
Thank you so much. Take
All
care,
right,
everyone.
thank you. Take
Thanks,
care.
Laura, for
Bye.
arranging it as
You're
well.
welcome.
Thank you, Laura. Take care.